Welcome back.
Welcome back to Inspiration Education.
Great to see you.
Yeah, this is episode 50-something.
50-something.
Yes.
50-something.
Sounds like we're talking about our age. I mean, anyways, we're going to move on from there. So today we thought we would do another episode about problem-based learning, since our last episode was about that, and we thought it would be pretty cool if we could show you problem-based learning in a different classroom, in a different discipline. Sure. So the last one was about government and the social sciences discipline.
Yep.
This week it's about
ecology and the natural sciences discipline. How about that?
Teach your kids to love to learn, and they will learn to love to live in a world where there's so much to learn through inspiration education.
What we're doing is we're attempting to do, more student-led, problem-based, solving an essential question kind of learning, right? And although we're imperfect, we really love sharing how we, just how we're trying to do it, how the messiness of it, the goods, the bads, and just processing that with you. So we thought that, and so that's why we thought we'd give you another discipline, another look at it.
Yeah, so what you're about to see are the students in Chan's classroom. Give them a preview of what they're going to see, and then we'll talk about on the other end.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that we filmed with this. I gave them an inquiry about what are the properties of water and allowed them to prototype a lab that would allow them to look at different aspects of the properties of water. And now we're connecting that to the oceanic environment. So how do the properties of water help to form the oceanic environment, and how do they interact with the topography of the ocean bottom itself and the continents and so on. So now it's kind of the scaffolded idea, allowing them to think through this aspect of water and then connect it and apply it. And a really cool part of what we're incorporating with this is in the next generation science standards, what we want to do is we want to give kids opportunities to model what is going on. And what we mean by that is not creating a model, which is actually what you're going to be seeing in one of them. But when we say modeling, we're talking about drawing diagrams. What's happening on the molecular level, or what's happening on a larger scale level using dots and arrows and diagrams and so on. So there was a really important part to this whole thing, that we're also trying to use the science and engineering practices that are in the next gen science standards.
Yeah, so basically you ask them, each team, to come up with some sort of an essential question, like what is it that I want to know about water, and each team huddled around and decided what they would want to learn about water. So just explain that process so that they could be looking for that when they watch the video.
Yeah, problem solving is an iterative process, right?
Iterative?
Iterative.
Not an English teacher. Don't know what that
Iterative
means.
process. So this idea of prototyping, and which it's okay to fail, that you learn from mistakes,
Gotcha.
that kind of thing. So each group picked what they thought to be a property of water, and then they came up with their own way to test it. So to whether they had a little boat with adding weight to that and seeing how buoyancy was impacted
By salt.
Yes. So the differences between freshwater and saltwater. And it was actually really cool. Without me telling them, they looked up what the typical salinity of the ocean was, and then they created that salinity of water, which was actually really cool. That
Isn't
they did
the
that on their
typical
own.
salinity, it's like 3,500 parts per million or something like that?
Exactly.
Whereas tap water in a safe range is no more than like 500 parts per million, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
very good. One of them asked a really great question. What would happen if two bodies of water of varying salinities came in contact with each other? What would happen? And so
I remember that.
So they designed something where they took two different salinities of water and put a barrier in between them, and then took out the barrier and see how it interacted, and then they flipped it. And so I was like, oh my gosh, they just discovered thermoclines, haloclines. I mean, they had no idea.
What clients?
Thermoclines and haloclines. So anyway, they were discovering on their own some really important inferences about water movement, which is what they're doing in the second part. So they're having an opportunity now to demonstrate water movement based on these properties. So I've asked them as a call to action, which is an important part of problem-based learning. It's like you don't just present an essential question and solve it, but what's your call to action? So their call to action is to teach someone else different than them who may have low motivation for what they're doing, for what they're being engaged by. And so it's really forcing them to think through what are our motivations for learning and as learners. And so there's, of course, in my mind, I'm helping them to understand what some principles of learning and lifelong learning are through this. So
Cool.
yeah, so it's kind of this cool scaffolded thing that we've been working on. And eventually they are going to teach to an authentic audience. By the end of the semester, they're going to identify an audience, find out the positionality, and create something to teach them about conservation. What's another way of looking at surface tension?
If you draw water drops on a point.
I'm wondering if this is more of what you were saying. If you put water into this graduated cylinder and you look at the water, what do you guys see?
Oh, the little U-shaped thing.
A meniscus, right? It forms a meniscus. Love your I wonder, right? Go ahead and say it out loud. How you want to do.
Water soluble.
And you can maybe write down a couple of them so you don't forget your ideas. And then pre-test it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Did I answer your question?
Regular water, so it's motion.
The construct of buoyancy. Go ahead and do.
Specific areas in the ocean, like on beaches.
That's up to you. That's up to you. How can we make it so that you can collect quantitative data? Because right now you have yes or no. Will it float or not float?
What we could do is this, so you know how, like,
What? No.
this will displace, if this, this would sink, this will displace as much volume as there is volume in here. But this will actually displace more because it has more surface area.
Yes. No. 10 now. Pow.
So what are we testing?
Buoyancy. We're seeing
20.
whether,
Good job, Connor. Thank you.
we're seeing whether salt water or fresh water is more buoyant.
And is that fresh or?
This is salt water.
Okay.
30.
You ready?
I used to just gone.
Any more than 2, you're gonna have to use about 3.
Just wait. It's cool because when the fresh water is on top,
Okay.
it doesn't mix. It like stays separated. But whenever you put the salt water, that's when it.
Oh, whoa. So right now the salt's on the top and it went straight in.
Yeah.
But the other one you had with the fresh was on the top and it didn't mix.
All right. Well, welcome back. How fun was that?
It's always so fun to watch the kids actually in the classroom.
Yeah.
Way more interesting than listening to us talk sometimes.
Oh, absolutely.
So
right.
what do you want to show them?
So I thought I'd show you, like, this is how I debrief the water lab. Each group creates what we call a super slate, and there's a pattern in having to do this with, I love how you mentioned that there's some purpose. What was their essential question? And the students this particular group had a question like, what's the difference of viscosity in salt water versus fresh water? And they came up with a lab to do it by dropping a Play-Doh ball into water and so on, and they have to graph it, and then each group gets a chance to do a gallery walk and see what the other groups talked about. But this is what I was talking about with modeling. So they had an opportunity to think through on a molecular level what was going on, and they're like, we don't know. And I'm like, just start. And so it's done through revision. So the idea of any problem-based learning is that you get feedback and you make better. You collaborate with other people and you improve. And so this particular diagram about what's going on in salt water versus fresh water, this represents individuals trying to figure it out and then coming together and collaborating over multiple times to come up with this. So this in and of itself represented a number of iterations in a peer review process.
Yeah.
Really, really cool. And that's that's how science and engineering is done.
Right.
And so problem-based learning lends itself very naturally to the natural sciences and to engineering projects.
Yeah.
And we see this in our robotics club, for example. This is how they work.
Yeah, and let's just talk about really quick some of the essential pieces of problem-based learning. So I don't know, I think we talked about that in our very first episode, but I don't know if we covered it last time when we talked about my government class, but like, for example, productive struggle would be one of them.
Huge. And you have to kind of brief that with them. I briefed that with them at the very beginning of the year, that this class is going to be based on productive struggle. And we have a saying in my class, the number one rule is to, and they're like, trust the Channy. You know, it's like, I'm like, yeah, that is our number one rule, is that they have to trust me, that I'm going to push them just enough to get them to produce something, but I'm not going to tell them the answers. And,
right.
And that takes a little bit of retraining, because
yes,
I think oftentimes what we do as teachers is we just give the answers, because we're afraid, right? To what, I have to get this content out to my kids, and if I don't tell them, they're not going to get it.
Yeah, but I mean, if somebody just tells you something, how much are you actually learning?
Right.
You got to figure it out on your own.
So that does take some training and scaffolding just for that. So we're at a point now where they get that, and I think they value that. I'd like to hear from, in a future episode, we're going to show kids responses to some of these things. What do you think about productive struggle and to this paradigm?
That'll be fun. And another one would be peer-to-peer feedback. Yeah.
Super important. There's a number of protocols that you can use. The one that we used today was Glow and Grow. Glow and Grow, where you give one, this is something great I see that's going on in Y, and then here's one opportunity for growth. That's one protocol, but there's any number of protocols that you can use to give productive feedback or to elicit really helpful feedback.
Right, exactly. And then...
and by the way, that should be metacognitive. You should be giving your own feedback, peer feedback, and that's all part of just one of the elements of besides teacher feedback.
Yeah, for sure, that it's peer-to-peer. Collaboration would be another one.
Why don't you talk about that?
Yeah, collaboration where your students, again, so this is a student-led thing that your students would be working on.
They came up with a question. They want to
figure out how to solve it. Figure out what is the method in which we're going to solve it. And so that's all about collaboration. And when they're first trying to figure this weird thing out that you're introducing to them, they'll be like, well, Mrs. Thomas, and I'm like, sometimes being a facilitator of learning is going
exactly,
because even though we know the answers, which by the way we don't always know the answers, right? They'll look at you and go, but Mrs. Thomas, it's just easier if you tell me. And I'm like, but you're not going to learn anything if I just tell you.
Yeah. Well, at the end of this session, when we went over this, there was a kid who was lingering, and after the bell rang, and he's like, well, what would happen if this? And I'm like, great question. And then he was like, well, but what about this? And I'm like, great question. And it was exactly that. And the kid laughed. And I'm like, I accomplished what I set out to do. Yes. They were having wonder. They were asking more questions. They were digging deeper into it. Yep. I'm like, exactly.
Yeah. So having that collaboration in a table group or however it is that you set it up, where they're bouncing ideas off of each other, and because really more than one mind is a great way to learn, bouncing things off of each other.
Well, and we're designed for that. We're built for relationship. Yeah, learning is meant to be done collaboratively, and I think this is a great model to do it. And again, we may be imperfect, but it's a lot more fun.
It is.
It's a lot more fun.
It is. I mean, just yesterday in my class, I'm just sitting there and I'm watching my students so fully and totally engaged in solving a problem, which was different from science. It had to do with the Electoral College, but it was relatable to them and how they were going to apply that here at the end of the semester. And they were so engaged. And all you have to do is just sit back and watch the magic happen. It's so much fun.
It's so great.
So
some of you may be wondering about, well, how do you assess this? And maybe we'll come up with a future episode about that. I do have a rubric that I use for Socratic engagement. I have a rubric for innovative projects. When you have a product, how is that assessed? And so I think we probably should talk more about that.
That's a great suggestion.
Yeah.
So Our plan is to have a couple more PBL examples. We'd love to show you one in math because I think sometimes we can get hung up there.
And the fine arts.
And arts too, yeah. So we're kind of reaching a couple of different disciplines. Yeah, and then we'll show you what students have to think about it. That'll be an episode. And assessment, great suggestion.
Yep, this is a great little series. I'm excited.
Okay. All right, well, we will see you next episode.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.